This podcast is a collaboration between Costard and Touchstone Productions and the Dads from the Crypt podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the How Not to Make a Movie podcast. I'm Alan Katz.
And I'm Gil Adler.
Today we have a guest named Ross Emery, who Gil has worked with a couple of times. He's an Australian director of photography, cinematographer. We'll talk about the difference between the two. He also has worked extensively and still works as a second unit DP. And that's especially the kind of movies that when you worked with Ross, Gil worked with Ross on Superman Returns and Valkyrie, really big movies. And it's funny, one of the things that I just learned about Ross was that when you both did Superman Return together, that was one of the first feature films to be made on digital.
Certainly a tentpole, a huge budgeted movie like that. Yeah, we did it with the Genesis, which is made by Panavision. And we had many problems, which I'm sure Ross will tell us about.
Yeah.
And I'll comment about. But it was really an interesting learning experience, and a little frightening along the way.
What year was this?
2004, 2005.
So the equipment has evolved considerably since then.
Oh, yeah.
Now a lot of productions use the red cameras. Are you see they get a lot.
There's a whole slew to choose from now.
Oh,
but then,
yeah.
In those days, that was it. Panavision was at the head of their game, and they had the Genesis, and that was the camera.
And either it worked or it didn't.
And when it didn't work, it was very, very.
Oh my God! Oh, and it's not like you go, well, let's. Is there another camera somewhere? No.
Don't forget on Valkyrie and on Superman, certainly on Superman, and probably on Valkyrie too.
Yeah.
We had a crew of maybe 300 people. This was not a crew of 25 guys or gals. This was a huge crew. On both shows. I mean, just to give you an idea, on both shows, especially Superman, I know on Superman we had 5 different units working all the time.
Wow.
And on Valkyrie, I'm sure we had many, maybe not 5, maybe 4, but we had 4 or 5 units always working.
You have said, and you do, you say when we speak to Ross that you thought the going digital on Superman Returns was going to be the end of your career.
Yes, indeed. And you'll find out more when we talk to Ross.
Here we go. And we'll more or less just
jump in
whenever
if you like. I mean, if you want to give me any rules or anything like that, because a sort of like, or maybe
rules
just stop me if it gets too libelous or anything.
There are no rules on our podcast.
Excellent, good. Okay, I'll self-censor a little where I can, but I understand where we're coming from.
I'm sorry, but rules in a knife fight. This is a knife fight, my friend.
Very good.
Were you not told that this was going to be a knife fight?
Didn't I tell you?
I turn everything into a knife fight anyway. That's my problem.
Yeah, it's the film business.
I told you, Alan.
For fuck's sake.
I told you, Alan. Australians are the best. They are just the best.
Now. We're having this conversation because Ross and Gil have worked together twice.
Yep, that's right.
Almost
3 times.
Yeah. Almost 3 times, yes. Yeah.
On a couple of particularly interesting films. It's which was Valkyrie and Superman Returns, wasn't it?
Now the first one was Superman Returns, yes?
Yes.
Okay. And you're on those 2 films. You were director of photography, second unit. Yes,
second unit. Yeah.
All right.
Or the bleachers, as I call it.
So my assumption is that a lot of our audience, they are passionate about movies. They don't necessarily know all the nuts and bolts stuff, and that's what we really like to get into. The difference, let's do nuts and bolts. All right, the difference between the first unit and the second unit is?
Well, I mean, kind of second unit. I've done a lot of second units, as anyone who kind of wants to look me up. I always find it like a particularly interesting place to be. It's terrific fun because it's like, it's kind of like you get to do a lot of the more interesting stuff, a lot of the action stuff, a lot of the sort of big setup stuff that kind of main units kind of can't really it's not very affordable for them to do. So you can spend a bit more time on it and stuff like that. But you're also kind of like, shock troops as well. So like if you have to kind of dive into a set to finish a scene that main unit didn't quite get and do all sort of the remaining shots and pickups and things, you kind of like the ninjas of the film set.
So a second unit, in addition to doing, action sequences, really that a first unit just is not going to get can we say that in general, second units are the ones getting is the unit that will get your action sequences?
Traditionally, yeah. That's kind of pretty much how the sort of gets divided up in the schedule. Right. So it's kind of moved on a little bit, sort of like to where second units handle a lot more of the more intricate visual effects stuff now as well. The stuff which is a bit time consuming. Anything that kind of has a sort of an element to it where the crew has to be a little bit more of a lightweight profile, whether you want to get in and get out quickly and stuff like that, because they're traditionally kind of like smaller and more nimble.
Right.
I mean, I've always had this dream of shooting a film with like 4 second units. I think it'd be great. So it's like, you can kind of like just
that's a really cool idea.
That machine of a main unit crew is just like can develop into something which is, as Gil would know perfectly well, so big and cumbersome. It's like, it's like steering an ocean liner through a slalom course. It's like you can't turn the thing around without 3 days notice and all that sort of stuff. So it's second unit is good. It's always interesting. It's always fun. You can always I kind of got to the point where I think for about 6 of the second unit films I did, I ended up doing the very first shot of the film and the very last shot of the film. Huh. So it's like it's kind of like that's always kind of like a nice card.
There are a lot of places where your work will really mesh with the first unit's work. Like I'm guessing the fight scenes in Shang-Chi.
Mm.
The first unit's not hanging around for all the wire work. That's second unit, right?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. I mean, pretty much all the action stuff on Shang-Chi was done second unit. We had a particular action.
It really is.
It was really kind of there was a second unit that happened in San Francisco as well with the bus sequence and stuff, the exteriors, which they did a great job. I wasn't involved in that. I was still in Sydney with a mask on inside a studio.
That is a terrific sequence. The bus sequence is really good.
And so that because we had a kind of like a particular style of action that was covered differently to what you'd normally cover a fight with. Was very much came out of the Jackie Chan school of sort of fight scenes in terms of the fight is divided up into very small segments.
Yeah.
And you basically get that bit just right, then you get that bit just right, then you get that bit just right. So more sort of Western way of doing things. It's like you do the whole fight and you put 4 cameras on it and, let the editor sort it out. So.
And this really was a bit by bit by bit by bit.
It was, yeah. Which is why you get this precision in it. And I wasn't a fan of it first up when we started doing it because I kind of thought it's kind of like, we're shooting kind of like one camera and we're shooting like 18 frames of the film. And it'll take us, a setup will take you 45 minutes or an hour. And so for that 18 frames, so it disturbed me a little bit in my sort of sub first AD world where I wanted to get the day and I wanted to get moving and shoot more stuff and things. But after a while, I kind of really realized what these guys were doing in terms of the action coordinators and the fight coordinators and things. And we jumped in, we embraced it, and kind of I thought it was a good result. I think it's the fight scenes in Shang-Chi are terrific.
Oh, I completely agree. I watched it because when I knew that we were going to be speaking, I wanted to see something, and the second unit stuff on that is just fantastic. It really is. I was quite taken by the movie as a whole.
It was good fun. Yeah, it was great, and it's like also like the mesh that's part of that is like you can't in terms of where I am with me and my crew and the second unit first AD. You had kind of like the action guys over here, which were all the fight guys. Brad Allen's team and all those guys. And then on the other side over here, you had all the Marvel visual effects guys. And you kind of felt like you had to be the grease in the cogs sometimes, whereas like, the action guys wanted to do this. and the visual effects guys sort of say, well, at the end, we have to get to kind of here. So where does the action stop? And a whole bunch of guys sitting in front of computers start. And you have to kind of be the grease in the cogs there to kind of make sure that what we do here is going to work for these guys over here. And that's, again, a challenge that I took up a long time ago. And I kind of feel that it's like a pretty important part of second unit in terms of my position as well.
And meantime, the second unit has to look, it's got to, the look of the second unit work has to mesh with the work of the first unit. It can't suddenly be lit differently. That would be odd.
Yeah, so, no, that's a primary sort of command, basically. And I've done a lot of work with Bill Pope, who was the main unit DP, because obviously we've done the Matrix films together. And one of the reasons I did the second unit on Shang-Chi was, one, because it was 15 minutes from my house to the studios, which is nice, rather than having to get on a plane to go to work. And the other thing is like reconnecting with Bill and doing that. And Bill's an absolute delight to shoot second unit for, because he understands the difficulties in terms of being pulled in different directions, and he also understands that you have to kind of keep your unit moving, and sometimes you can't do exactly what you would love to do, but you're going to have to please five masters, basically. So it's a particular skill, and also I know how Bill works, I know how Bill lights. The thing is with working with different DPs and how they light, it kind of it's a skill I've worked on over the many years in terms of finding out what their intentions are and things like that. Because sometimes if you go to the DP on the main unit and you sort of say, how do you want this to look? And they'll talk to you for 15 minutes and it won't make any sense at all. But
how can that be?
Because there's with DPs and with directors, and sort of like when you sort of like cross a certain threshold in the creative process, it becomes very instinctive, intuitive, and ethereal. And it's very hard to kind of make it a tangible object that you can actually sort of describe. It becomes a feeling, it becomes a intuition. And I work like that when I DP main unit as well. I couldn't explain to you why I did things. So what you basically do is your best friend there is the gaffer. You basically go to the gaffer and you sort of say, what was going on here? And he would then basically say, well, it then becomes nuts and bolts. It then becomes, okay, well, we used the 20K up in the roof there because we wanted to do this. We wanted the light to shape like this. And so you kind of start assembling the information. You go to the camera operator, the A camera operator, and you say, well, listen, why are you doing that? He said, well, we shot this scene handheld because they wanted a particular kind of quick feel between the frames, things, and so you kind of assemble all the information.
If we took the director of photography or the cinematographer out of the picture, as it were, it would be a play.
Yeah.
And so really from the beginning of cinematography, it's always been about light.
It has, basically. I mean, that's just purely sort of like part of the process, really.
What you do,
what you do, you needed the light. So, and your first credit is 1986, I think. Yeah, somewhere around there. Yeah.
What was it called? Get my glasses on. Best. No, it just says first credit. I didn't mark down what it was. You're Australian.
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's the career start thing is interesting for everyone. It's always a great story when you find out where people come from.
Yeah.
I'm the son of a documentary filmmaker and stills photographer, and even though that I had no interest whatsoever, I wasn't one of these kids who kind of was shooting Super 8 movies in the backyard or anything like that. I was too busy, sort of like playing football and chasing girls. But and ended up kind of in the first year of a law degree before I kind of figured that that was kind of what I didn't want to do. And like a lot of people in this business, it's like you end up here because you just don't fit anywhere else. And it's it just you've got an awful lot of people who are just odd shapes.
We're the box of broken toys. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's actually pretty good description.
How true is that? How true is that?
Yeah. It does, and the minute I kind of then sort of moved into this world, and I did a film a film course at college, which I never finished.
Why? Okay. Let's not rush rush past this. Why do you think you're a broken toy, Ross?
It just became at that point, I kind of, you have to experience things. So when you're that old, and I'm talking about early 20s and stuff, you're not really fully developed in terms of your emotions and your intelligence and stuff like that. And well, maybe it was just me. So, and so you had to experience things.
Apparently, it is a thing with the with the male of the species.
Yeah,
we are late developers.
Yeah. And you kind of have to experience things before you know that's not what I want to do, and usually sort of like those experiences will get formed, and it's whether it's the people that you're associating with. I mean, when I went to the first year of a law degree, it wasn't so much the work or anything like that kind of stopped me from proceeding with it. It was the type of people involved at that point. And it's like if they just weren't my kind of people. Mm-hmm. And it's and a lot of it's a kind of very much, everyone kind of discusses kind of tribal things, and you kind of go through, I went through probably 3 or 4 different sort of semi-occupations, if you like. And then when I went to film college, I kind of basically chucked everything and said, I'm going to go to a film college. Because I think my mother suggested it because she was sick of me hanging around the house and, not being very productive.
How old were you at this time?
Probably 21, 22.
21.
So
were movies a thing to you at that point? Were they?
Only through my father, really, because he was a movie buff. He was a great fan of Kurosawa, and he was the guy who kind of took me along to see Blade Runner and all that sort of stuff, which was kind of, now when I look back, are kind of sort of pretty much sort of seminal moments in my film sort of world, or my film being. And I also had the ephemera of filmmaking around the house everywhere. There were books on filmmaking. There was cameras around, 16mm cameras. There were stills cameras. There were all this sort of stuff. So
your dad's
it was always there.
Your dad's interest in film was just, excuse me, as a fan, or was it?
Oh no, he was a documentary filmmaker.
Oh, so your dad was a documentary.
Yeah.
Your dad was a documentary filmmaker. Okay, so filmmaking was already there.
It was in the air. Yeah.
Was the fact that you had not embraced it up to that point, were you rejecting filmmaking?
Possibly, yeah. Without turning this into a therapy session, it's like.
Well, yeah. I'm just. Hey, my dad was a surgeon, and his dad was a physician, and I rejected the family business to go run away and join the circus.
Yeah, well, it kind of was that, I think. I mean, sort of like, I might need a few more sessions and several $100s to kind of work to that point, but it is definitely possible. So it's,
Ross, we don't charge. We won't charge.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you. It's like, but I think this is probably more productive anyway. So, possibly it was that, but it's in the end kind of just the fact that, as I was kind of getting to, is like when you get into the film world, you suddenly you find your tribe. And suddenly the people, even though they came from like incredibly different backgrounds and ethnicities and all this sort of stuff, you felt they were the same people.
Yeah,
and it instantly kind of clicked. So
you do find your tribe, and it really is, and that's when you're part of a film team, a unit, a crew, and you're making a piece. Yeah, you do become tribe.
Yeah, you do, and especially in the earlier days when our crews were a bit smaller and I found our connections were a little bit tighter and things like that. It's like, you really had sort of people that you kind of formed close connections with. I mean, after I kind of went to film college, I went and worked on documentaries for about 5 years and did a lot of traveling and a lot of
after you came to your senses, you mean?
Well, I don't know if I haven't come to my senses yet. It's like,
glad to hear that.
Coming to my senses is kind of basically probably starting a successful podcast and sitting back and chatting to people about things. But that's probably where I'm looking at you guys and thinking that's a dream. So it's like,
going back to that dream for a second.
Yeah.
A lot of times when we think of second unit directing, we think of, or audiences think of, I think, or film students think of, that's the guy who's directing everything that doesn't have to do with principal actors. You take the principal actors out of the situation, and then you have the second unit. Now, when you're lucky enough to have someone on your team like the man we're talking to today, sometimes, and you fall behind a little bit with the main unit, sometimes that then gets shifted over to the second unit, and now the second unit director is actually working with principals.
Yep.
And it doesn't happen often because it's kind of scary to do on one level. On another level, if you have the right second unit director, it's really a godsend. And that really acts as a savior. And Ross fits into that category.
Yeah, I mean, so some of the most fun second unit stuff I've done is I directed the second unit on that film Burnt, the Bradley Cooper film, which was about the Michelin star chef in London. And that I kind of got brought in. It's like about a third of the way through production because they felt they needed to kind of find another layer in the film and things like that. And what we did on that is we kind of, Bradley Cooper's character is like a Marco Pierre White sort of burnt out chef who was sort of on his comeback trail. And we spent about a week in London where Bradley would work with the main unit during the day. And then we'd pick Bradley up at about sort of 10 o'clock at night, and with a very small sort of 5 or 6 person crew, maybe a little bit more. And we go around to all these kind of like late night cafes and Brick Lane. I don't know if you know that in London, where all the curry houses are and like the real sort of street food scene in London.
Sure.
And we take Bradley out, and essentially we had production people with us to sort of get the permit to sort of like do all the permissions and stuff like that, and put Bradley in this environment because that was very much part of the character that he needed. And they couldn't do that with a main unit. You couldn't sort of shut off the street and employ 500 extras and buy out businesses and stuff like that. So we did I hesitate to say guerrilla thing, but we had this very, very small unit. We went to the markets and the fish markets at 4 o'clock in the morning and just shot scenes with Bradley. And I think on one occasion we brought another actor out as well, and we even did a little two-handed scene. And it was terrific, and it really sort of enhanced the film. It got the film out of the small sets and into the larger world and into the sort of great iconic kind of nighttime London scenes and things. Really opened the film up. The interesting thing was that the reason we were so successful in that is in pre-production on that film, and they were casting around for stand-ins for Bradley Cooper, which, as we all know, is like someone who will just stand there and you can line up the cameras and light and everything. And they ended up finding this guy from West London who looked remarkably similar to Bradley Cooper. He was a great photo double for Bradley Cooper. So what we would do is we would go into these little streets in London at night, and we'd basically have this guy who was in the wardrobe, and we just have him with us as the crew. And everyone would come up and say, "Is that Bradley Cooper?" And we go, "No, it's a stand-in, it's a double." And we did that for like an hour or so. And then when we were ready to shoot, Bradley would be sitting in a car around the corner, and we'd swap out the double for Bradley. And by that stage, everyone on the street just, "Oh no, it's not Bradley Cooper, it's a double," you know. It's like, and we swap him out, and we figured we could get about sort of 25 minutes to half an hour of shooting with Bradley before someone twigged, and we'd have to put him back in the car and send him off again. So it was great fun. It was like very, very flexible, and that's when sort of second units can be really, really useful on that level. We can open up a film and we can put the actor in a real environment and make it work that way.
There's kind of a guerrilla filmmaking quality to it.
There is, yeah. It's which is, I'm not usually a massive fan of the guerrilla filmmaking ideal, because sometimes it can really bite you in the ass. But on that occasion, it kind of worked particularly well.
Superman Returns.
Yeah,
that's the first time, yeah.
Yeah,
that's the first time.
How did this come? How did this come together?
Oh, I mean, basically, it's like, you know, I kind of call my career kind of like, you know, the tax incentive career sometimes, because it's like, you know, I kind of get to be in a place which offers a good enough incentive to attract films from Hollywood to come to wherever I am, and you know, sort of I get a head start in kind of getting onto productions like that sometimes. I'm sure that all the people from LA will hate me saying that, and I do sympathize with them, but you know, it's something that kind of does happen. But you know, Sydney's my hometown. Superman.
Never based out of Los Angeles.
Sorry,
you've never based out of Los Angeles.
I've based out of Los Angeles for about 3 years.
For 3 years, okay.
But as what happens when in Hollywood is like, I was based out of LA, and the 3 years that I was based out of LA, I don't think I ever shot in LA. I shot in Vancouver, I shot in New York, I shot in Montreal, I shot in London, I shot in Cape Town, and it's like, I'm like, what am I doing in Los Angeles?
Why are you spending the money on rent?
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, it's great to be there for the meetings, but I have done a few meetings where they've rung me up and said, can you come in on Thursday? And I'm in Sydney and they're in LA. And I go, yeah, absolutely. What time? And I can jump on a plane and get there within, sort of less than 24 hours. I had a very good system of getting from Sydney to LA and back again, which I did for a few years. And then when I was based in LA, it was kind of like, you're there the whole time, but it really was the thing of sort of like, I'm not shooting here. What am I doing here? So
should I know that system for my own personal use?
I can share it with you. Exactly. I mean, it helps to have some people, work at major airlines, because you can basically look up which planes are kind of not full and book accordingly. And I knew which seat to book on the A380, which would give me extra legroom if I was on a short run, or I knew if I flew from Sydney to Brisbane and picked up the Brisbane to LA flight, I could guarantee an upgrade. And it's like, I had this whole system worked out. It was like,
well, but hey. Is travel between Australia and LA and the United States back to normal? Because I know during
it is now. Yeah, I haven't been there since COVID, but it's like I'm due for a trip over there and see some people. So that'll be on the cards soon.
I know when we were making Superman Returns, I had a relationship with Qantas. We had made a deal with Qantas. And I was flying back and forth for prep and flying back and forth during the shoot for Comic-Con in San Diego. And it got to the point where we're on the plane and my wife comes back and she has a bottle of champagne. And I go, honey, that's on the bar. You're supposed to take a drink. You leave the bottle there. You shouldn't take the bottle. And she said, no, this is for us. And I go, no, it's not for us. It's for everybody on the plane. And she goes, no, the head steward, because we flow so much, he's given us this bottle of champagne. So I go, right. I don't think that's the case. So she gets him over and he starts yelling at me. He goes, I gave your wife a bottle of champagne. Why are you saying it's not for her? It is for her. It's not for you. It's for her.
Yeah. That happens. I knew all the staff on first name terms with all the staff. That was kind of crazy for years. But in any case, I was in Sydney. Superman Returns was shooting in Sydney. And I met Tom Siegel, who was the main unit DP. And interestingly, I just shot a film, which we'd shot part of the film on digital cameras. And that was kind of, we were kind of like early on in digital camera world. And Tom at that stage, I don't think he decided yet, but they were still thinking about shooting Superman on digital. And so it kind of had a little sort of foot in the door that way. And again, some of this stuff is because, like, I'll prioritize things that kept me at home. And, if I can sleep in my own bed and go to work, it's always a bonus. So I met Tom, signed on for the film, and buy the ticket, take the ride. It was interesting, the whole world of, I think we're the second film in the world to kind of shoot the new high definition digital system, which was, you could make a movie about that on its own. And that was a pretty exciting kind of moment to be at. And but also, I mean, it was kind of like the first Superman film that had been done since the Donner stuff. So
you've been a very big part of watching the transition from film to digital.
Yeah. I've kind of been amongst the first on all these things, which is interesting. So.
Well, I'd say that's more than interesting. That was an absolute game changer for our industry.
Absolutely was, and an absolute game changer for cinematographers everywhere, because it's like, I do remember like the first day I shot on Superman, and it was literally, we got to the end of the day and it was like, well, that was all good. I took off my belt with my light meters on and handed to my AC, and it was like, that was it. Whereas in a normal world where you're shooting film, the end of the day's shooting is just the start of your anxiety. Because from that moment forward, you've got the first AC is taking the mag off the camera. The second AC is unloading the film from the camera into the can, giving it to a PA who's taking it to the lab, who's giving it to someone else who's going to put it in a machine and you hope that, and there is so many things in that process that takes usually about sort of 12 to 15 hours that can adversely affect the outcome of your images.
It's out of your
if
hands.
you're a little bit, if
Completely out of your
everybody's a
hands.
little bit off, in the same direction, you can suddenly be too dark, or you can be overexposed, or you can be, and you grow up with it as a camera department person, from being a second AC loading mags to a first AC pulling focus to a camera operator operating to a DP. You kind of learn to deal with that kind of anxiety, and it is. So I'm not sort of overblowing that. It's like, and till the following day, and you might get a phone call, or usually what used to happen, as Gil would know, is like they fax through or deliver a neg report. And the ones we used to get in Sydney were blue A4 sheets of paper, and every DP worker would know this feeling, is that, you're standing on the set at like 9 o'clock in the morning and you're still wondering about the day before because you haven't heard anything. You're hoping it's all good, but you took a few risks, and you took it, you're a little bit brave. And then suddenly you see a door in the studio wall open, and there's a producer standing there scanning his eyes around, and he's holding a blue piece of paper, which is the neg report. It's the lab report, and they reported whether you did well or whether you did badly. And they're scanning the room, and then suddenly they lock eyes on you across the stage, and they start walking straight towards you, and you're just frozen in spot. You're a deer in the headlights. And this person just keeps pacing through, and they're kind of like walking around C-stands and things like this.
Negative report in so many ways.
Yeah, and they come up to you and they stand in front of you and they hand you this blue piece of paper and they say, everything from yesterday was fine.
Yeah.
And it's like, and you go, oh, okay. And for that next kind of 15 minutes, your anxiety level drops and you're there. And then you start working through the day and you're making your decisions, and the whole process repeats itself again the next day and the next day and the next day. And so it was a particularly interesting existence when you're shooting film, because you could do your best work possible, but there's probably 8 other people in the chain that can adversely affect your images. And with digital, it's like, it's there, it's in front of you. Yeah. You've got your scopes and you've got your DITs now who'll tell you whether you're exposed properly, and you don't have to kind of cross your fingers. I mean, photochemical film process was a black art, and that's why you could move towards the fact that the cinematographers, the great cinematographers who worked in those systems, are really sort of treated like deities. It's because they worked in this system of black art. No one knew what Conrad Hall and Vilmos Shigman and all these guys were kind of doing. It's suddenly all they knew was the next day when they watched dailies, everything looked amazing. Yeah. And no one could see the system. So that's a real sort of golden age, I'm sure. But conversely, sort of, I don't miss the anxiety. So I was always kind of one of the DPs who kind of, said, as soon as it's good as film, as good as film, I'm happy, I'm there. So
I wonder if you remember some of the anxiety, because we were one of the first companies to use this digital format. Yeah. And we were shooting, and it was very, very hot in Sydney and in Tamworth, and the camera would start freezing up.
That's right. Yeah. It
would stop. And so
it was overheating.
I was on the phone with Panavision in LA and in Singapore, and, having conniptions because we couldn't shoot. We had 3 or 4 cameras, and none of them worked because it was so hot. Yeah. So we wrapped them in ice. And then, we asked the Panavision to come out and help us and they said, well, they couldn't be there for 3 or 4 days or something outrageous like that. And I said, okay, well, I can just tell you that if you're not going to be here for 3 or 4 days, 2 days from now, we will not be using your cameras, and we'll never use them again on this show. And lo and behold, they showed up like the next day they flew in. And
wow. Yeah, look, a plane ticket fell from the sky.
Yeah, and we realized that it was the ice that would help us out. And they were able to figure out what to do. But we only got through the couple of days of shooting before they appeared, because we wrapped the cameras in ice. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's still a problem with some digital cameras. Certain brands of digital cameras still you wouldn't take them to the desert. You just wouldn't. So, the new Arri cameras are as bulletproof as I've seen for a digital camera. But I do remember the ventilation systems, and they upgraded the fans in those Panavision Genesis cameras. And we had to stop, people like Jimmy Jensen covering them with Velcro for all their bits and pieces and leaving the vents open and all that sort of stuff. So,
and I remember seeing my career just flying away from me.
I mean, that was a difficult enough film anyway, with regards to kind of like relaunching Superman and the suits and the story and we had some interesting personalities on that show as well.
So really, you think so?
Yeah. But when you say that, Ross, who is leaping first to mind?
Oh wow, I don't know. You guys will have to be really nice to me in the edit if this works. But Bryan Singer is okay. I'm going to go out here. I may have a different opinion. Gil may have a different opinion. Bryan Singer is a very, very good storyteller. I have no doubt about that, and his attention to detail is remarkable. He comes with a number of difficulties, which he has a personality that kind of is tricky to kind of make movies with, because he comes from a direction where it's the decision-making process is kind of not very collaborative, if you like. So I'm kind of watching Gil's face as so I'm saying this, but
I'm sitting here going, I wonder how far you're going to go. I can go a lot further.
Well, it's no doubt about that. It's like, he kind of like there's a process there which kind of like it's very, very hard to get into, and it's very, very hard to make efficient. And I will always sort of say that I think he's a very good storyteller, and I don't have any problem saying that. But there's some of the other stuff that comes along with him, and he's not alone in the director's world in terms of that. There certainly are a personality type director.
His personality issues are costing him as we speak.
They are, and it's kind of like there's an entire podcast season built on directors' affectations and things like that, and the personality traits of certain film directors. It's like I've kind of been through a lot of them, and it's like good and bad. And it's like you get into the argument of separating. Okay, you have to separate. Do you have to separate the personality from the work? And can you do that? I mean, we've all been sort of through that, even with the Harvey Weinstein stuff, which is like, okay, you still can't really kind of say too many bad things about the Weinstein Company's output over a number of years, with some really, really great films, and some really, really great films with very, very strong female leads and characters and things like that. But
Harvey's a monster with great taste in material.
Yeah, he is. I mean, it's like,
but he's a monster.
I did 3 films with Harvey, and it's like, he would come at you with like bang. He'd just like go, wow. I've been yelled at by Harvey a few times. And it's like, and you kind of go, you have to just suck it up and kind of go, and then you sort of like sit back and you regroup and you go, okay, fine. He said 8 things.
What was the worst thing that Harvey ever subjected you to? Again, Harvey is down. Kick him. He ain't getting back up, and he's got it coming to him.
I'd basically done a film for Harvey, which Phil Noyce had directed, called The Giver, with Meryl Streep and Jeff Bridges. And I think we did a really good film, a really good job on that. And it looked fantastic and it looked great. And the type of film it was, we'd orchestrated this treatment for the film, which was movement, a lot of movement. And that kind of just went very naturally with the story and very naturally with the characters. And from the very start, we had this thing. And Harvey loved it. And so he then kind of like, you don't get asked, you kind of get told. Harvey said, okay, now you're going to do this film. And it's like, okay, great. And that was a very, very beautiful film that we shot in England and Austria, called The Woman in Gold, which is about Maria Altmann, who trying to get the Gustav Klimt painting back from the Austrian government that had been stolen by the Nazis.
Right.
Very, very gentle, intelligent film. And it didn't require lots and lots of camera movement. I mean, you had Helen Mirren and Daniel Bruhl and Ryan Reynolds doing fabulous performances, but the whole tone of the film is a much more gentle kind of tone. And Harvey just kept yelling at me, saying, you got to move the camera more, you got to move the camera more. And it's like, well, Harvey, there's no room to move the camera. I didn't sort of, I just basically prefaced, I said, we will move the camera when we can. And it's like, you got to move the camera more. You got to move the camera more. And it's like, that's about as harsh as Harvey got with me, because I kind of was able to sort of deflect and hide and run away when he was around.
But that is one of the tricks. That's one of the survival skills that you have to learn if you're going to survive. You know, for Gil and I, it was Joel.
Yeah, well, with Joel and all those guys, it's like, you know, you kind of go. It is the schoolyard bully sometimes, and it's like you got to kind of just stand up and look them in the eye and kind of like, you know, kick him in the shins occasionally if you're brave enough. So
I would aim higher.
Which is kind of like, it brings me to when I was younger, I kind of had this moment with it's on my CV, and I did work on the island of Dr. Moreau, and John Frankenheimer, again, this sort of personality,
dear.
big personality, and it's like, and again, he comes from the school of directing of the louder you yell, the better response you're going to get.
Yeah.
And he had this thing of, he would just come up to you for like 2 feet away from you and just like put his face down into you, and he'd literally yell at you from like 1.5 feet. And that's him being nice. That's him telling a nice story about his kids or something. So when he's angry, it's another whole level. So, but we were stuck up in the jungles, and the whole thing was madness anyway, with the Marlon Brando and Val Kilmer thing. It was just the most insane production I've ever been on.
There have been, you know, our podcast is called How Not to Make a Movie. That we should do
Well, listen, I'm very happy
everyone will talk about it.
Yeah. But in this particular case, we were kind of like, you know, we were lining up shots, and everyone was terrified of John, because he'd come in to replace the previous director who'd got fired, and he'd brought in, you know, some people, they're very much old Hollywood, William Fraker and some people like that. And we were kind of like, we were thinking we were working on this kind of crazy little film in the jungle, and suddenly it became this kind of big thing. And it's like, and John was kind of like lining up this shot, and it's like, and he's like, yeah, here, we're 24, here. And I'm sort of like behind him. I was operating the camera for the first part of that, and then I went on to shoot second unit for the rest of the show. And he turned around and looked at me, and I kind of must have had my like resting bitch face on or something like that. And he says, "What? You don't agree?" And I basically looked at him and said, "Oh, fuck this, I can only get fired." And I said, "No, we shouldn't be there. We should be over here." And he goes, "Why?" And he said, "Well, listen, this character comes up and looks at Marlon Brando and says, if you're there, you're not going to see into his face. We should be over here." And he looked at me, he says, "You know, you're right." And it's like, and from that moment, actually, it's like, you know, John and I got on really, really well. You know, it's like, it was hard. It was actually quite harsh. I answered back. I was just like, fuck this. It's like, I'm not going to go through the whole film just sort of like being terrified of this guy. And it's like, because he could be quite terrifying. And he did, when he first arrived on the film, the first day of shooting, he basically orchestrated a test. Pretty much every person got tested. And I was the camera operator, and he mapped out this dolly shot, which had like 9 different moves and up and down and ending up with a whip pan onto Val Kilmer's face and stuff like that. The thing went for about 4 minutes, and it's like, and it was just to test me out. So it's like, and then the Steadicam guy the next day got, you know, the impossible Steadicam shot. And so if you survive that, then you're kind of pretty cool. But you kind of got to get into these people's heads. And in the end, I got on really well with John. I really did like him. He's with the craziness of that film, I would have loved to have worked with him on a less insane production. But because he was a filmmaker, that's for sure. And he was the most important person on the set. You know, it was not the actor, not the producer, not anyone. He was certainly from a different era.
So, yeah, very definitely. Yeah, that was our experience of him. Yeah, Gil?
Yes, I'll take the Fifth Amendment, you know, mind. Going back to Harvey for a second, I don't know if I ever told you this story, Alan. I had a situation with Harvey.
Did you?
And,
I do not know this story.
I was represented by CAA, and in their infinite wisdom, they wanted me to be a TV director, and I didn't really want to be a TV director. But, you know, they called me up one day and they go, we got a call from Harvey Weinstein, and he wants to see you in New York, like 2 days from now. And I said, why? What does he want? What can't we talk on the phone? What I got to go to New York for? And no, he wants you in New York. So they fly me to New York, first class. They put me up in the Tribeca Hotel, which is a beautiful hotel right near their office on Greenwich Street. I go over the next day, I walk into the office, and I meet Bobby. And Bobby's talking to me for like an hour, and I'm like, what am I doing here? And he goes, well, Harvey wants to talk to you. And he's going to be in a minute. And so Harvey comes in, and the two of them now are with me, just the three of us. And they're going on and on, you know how to make movies the way we want to make movies, and you have respect for the budget, and you have great looking stuff, and you know how to get more out of a dollar than other people. And I'm sitting there looking, I'm going, oh, yeah, okay, yeah. And he goes, so we want to make an overall deal with you. So I said, oh, okay. And that's pretty much what my agent said. He said, they want to make an overall deal with you. Go to New York, see what they want to do. So I said, so what do you want to do? And they said, well, we want to make an overall deal with you. I said, what does that mean? And they said, well, we'll do that with your agent. We're not going to talk to you about that. I said, oh, okay, cool. And the meeting was over. I left and I said, so what do I do now? And they said, well, if you want to spend a day or two in New York, stay at the hotel, no problem. And then fly back. So I fly back. I spend a day or two in New York. I fly back to LA. And I talked to my agent while I'm in New York, and I said, it went great. He goes, that's fantastic. I'm sure we'll hear from him in the next day or two, and we'll make this deal work. Blah, blah, blah. And I come back to LA, nothing. The weekends, nothing. The next week happens, nothing. I call my agent. I go, what happened to Harvey? He said, I don't know. I haven't heard from them. I said, isn't that odd? I mean, they made such a big deal. I had to be in New York on that Thursday. It was Monday. Had to get on a plane tomorrow. And we never heard from them. The only thing we heard was about 2 weeks later, Disney had purchased the company. And so my agent at the time said he thought that had something to do with it. And I said, how could that have something to do with it? They knew that if they were selling the company, 2 weeks ago, they knew what they were doing. So why I don't see how it has anything to do with it.
That's weird. Yeah.
And we never heard what happened. We never heard from them again. It just
it's funny working with Harvey. I mean, I think I did maybe four jobs with him, and he didn't. No one asked me to do any of those jobs. They basically said, Harvey wants you to do this. It's like, so you don't get, would you like to do this movie? Right. It's like, Harvey wants you to do this, and it's like basically, it's like being made an offer you can't refuse. Basically, it's like.
But I never found out what that trip was all about or why I took it.
That's weird, isn't it? Yeah.
I bet you it ain't that way in prison.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's like, it's just kind of like, what is it? One day you're the rooster, the next day you're the feather duster. So
right.
Yeah.
You've done a fair number of superhero movies. Looking at the
have, yeah.
Wolverine, and of course, in the Marvel universe, Shang-Chi. Is there some trick to lighting the superhero world?
Oh yeah, there is. It's kind of interesting. I mean, I would sort of preface this by saying Wolverine was kind of like a step to the side to the superhero world. I thought we kind of like were able to kind of get away with sort of doing something a bit different there.
How do you mean?
A bit more sort of narrative based in terms of the production design and the lighting and things like that. I mean, that comes from James Mangold, who kind of did it with Logan as well. It kind of, he wasn't interested in just doing a big, broad kind of superhero thing. He was rare, and he as a director is great because he's so character and narrative driven. That's the most important thing. And we had to kind of like stay within the canon, of course, but that wasn't the problem. And I think that, but the story, the thing with superhero stories is you do have to light in such a way that you have space, you've got room to move, you've got to supply a little bit more attention to things like stunts and things like special effects and visual effects and things like that. You can't make the camera kind of being the god of the set. It has to kind of accommodate these other things. So you have to light in such a way that the stunt riggers can still get things from the roof, and you have to accommodate the visual effects in terms of green screens and or shoot-offs and things like that.
And you still
that's the nuts and bolts of it. So.
And you still have to accomplish the look that the director wants.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like I say, sort of I think for like mostly that comes along, but certainly sort of a lot of the Marvel films, and I say this with no disrespect to anyone working on them, but a lot of the look is kind of developed in post. They have such massive amounts of control over the images in post that it's not like you're just sort of like supplying them. You're not like just data acquisition for visual effects, but you're certainly kind of probably leaving more to the post section for the overall look than you would on other films. And certainly sort of like they're wanting as much available data as they can in terms of the range of lighting and not having things too dark, not having things too bright. They want to be able to kind of like decide these things later. And
so really, so as you are shooting the scenes, and again, I guess shooting digitally and shooting with LED lights has got to be, that also is a massive change from I mean, first of all, it lights so much faster. It's so much cooler. It's nowhere near as hot on a set when you're using those lights. And they're going for what, just the flattest white light that you can put out there?
Well, they would want that. And certainly I've had some visual effects departments argue for that. And you kind of have to push back. You have to kind of like sort of say, well, listen, it's not that I don't trust you, but I don't trust you. So I've at least got to kind of bake in a little bit of the direction I want to go. And certainly that I'm very big on all the jobs I do. I'm very big on making very, very good relationships with the visual effects departments. Because you know that, later down the track when you're 2 films away from that one that they're still working on, they're making decisions that will be reflected in what your work. So you have to have a good relationship with them, and you have to sort of trust them and form this kind of bond that, listen, this is what I want to do, and make sure that your creative choices are not completely tossed out the window and in search of sort of something else. And I can't sort of like I can't really sort of speak to sort of the Avengers films and stuff like that, but they have a particular look. But it's not comic book. It's cinema, but there's opportunities in there in some of the smaller scenes to kind of do some things. But a lot of the stuff, I mean, you look at those last Avengers films where there's 35 characters in a frame, and you suddenly read in the trades that not one of them was on set at the same time. And it's like, you have to kind of accommodate all this sort of stuff. It's not quite the old saying of like, you're not a DP, you're a traffic cop, basically. You're trying to sort of manage all this stuff and kind of sort of get things into a world where it's not terrible later.
It's not terrible later.
Well, I'm pretty good at picking it, and I can tell you there are some Marvel films around where I can see that either the visual effects department got off the leash, and or a director of photography was not in a place where they could have forced a little more, and you've ended up with quite flat, uninteresting kind of photography, and that's always noted. And no one gives you, I mean, you can't screen your alibis, so it's you have to kind of make sure that there's something there in the original photography that will force them in a particular direction. And it's whether it's just the framing or whether it's really working really hard on the relationships and concept art and things like that, and kind of basically making sure that it's that thread is taken right through. So because, like you say, I mean, on a lot of those bigger films, I mean, I'll be 2 films deep into something else, and they're just still finishing that one. So, yeah.
When you think of how it started with just light, with really just when you think back to what guys like Fritz Lang did with light, and suddenly doesn't even really matter anymore. They just light it flat, and we'll never mind fix it in post. We'll do it all in post.
Yeah. I mean, it is true. It's like it's again, it's a sliding scale. Sometimes, like the Marvel films recently have kind of become quasi-animated films. It's because you sort of like, there's the differences in what is real live photography and unaffected by visual effects. That counts just becoming smaller and smaller and smaller on a lot of films. It's like, and it's like, again, it's like, the decision-making process. You've got to, as a director of photography, I'd like the kind of decision-making process to be a little bit more friendly towards the original intention of the film, because it can be kind of like hijacked, if you like. And that's why I don't like doing kind of like the flat photography thing, and just sort of doing something that just forces you in a direction. But like I say, you have to take so much stuff on faith that they'll do it. And most of the time, everything kind of looks great, and but it's sometimes disappointing when you sort of see the final product and you kind of go, wow, that kind of got a bit messed up there. So that's but I mean, I have to say that most of the time I'm kind of pretty pleased with how things came out, and I'm in awe of really great visual effects teams. Are just sort of astonishing what they can do. That's and keep it in the creative world as well.
What work do you have coming up? You've got a couple things that are. You just did something that sounds really interesting. An untitled Woody Woodpecker. You're now.
Yeah.
Let me before we get to that. There's the director of photography and there's the cinematographer. What stands between those two things?
You want my definition?
Yeah.
The director of photography has less photos of themselves on their Instagram feed.
Okay. I wanted to ask. I wanted to ask someone who would know.
Well, that's my definition of this one. So,
no, I'm just a dumb writer.
On a drier, more boring kind of aspect, I kind of think director of photography should be reserved for feature film or large production projects. I don't think you can be called a director of photography on a TV commercial or a music video. I think that's a cinematographer. And it's only when you get to the point where your responsibilities are much larger, and your pre-production has been involved and your post-production has been involved, and you're part of the storytelling process. That's a director of photography.
So on the Woody Woodpecker project, though, you are the cinematographer.
I don't know why it's gone down like that. Sometimes
that's weird, because that now feels
decisions.
wrong.
So yeah, but I can get that changed. I probably would change that if I had the time.
Screw you, IMDb. You're getting Ross all wrong.
And yeah, I could call up Woody and put in my 2 cents.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I just want to ask a quick question about. So, is that a combination of animation and live action?
Yeah, we have like 3 or 4 fully animated characters in that, and then a whole bunch of real people, if you want to call them that. It's that was kind of like a COVID film, if you like. That was kind of in Australia, and that was the thing where we couldn't travel, and we were all quarantined and stuff like that, and so not that I'm saying I wouldn't have done it. It's actually produced by a good friend of mine, John Kuiper, who asked me to do the film and really wanted me to do it, because he had a director a really lovely director, John Rosenbaum, who's did a very, very good job, but he hadn't sort of done anything of this size before. So it's he wanted to kind of put a little team around him and stuff like that. So very pleasant film to work on, and it was nice to sort of kind of again relaunching an icon. I actually think it's actually going to be a very good film. It's like Woody Woodpecker is basically he's an anarchist basically, and they kind of kept that aspect to his character. It's like he's not a cute little fluffy bunny. He's like he literally is like
he's a troublemaker, and an anarchist. Yeah.
And they've kept that aspect to it, which is good. So Woody just like trashes the place, and so it was fun to do. But the thing that I've done recently, which is actually more interesting, is I got offered some stuff sort of like the second half of last year, and I kind of I reached a little bit of fatigue, I think, in terms of overall and the whole COVID thing and everything like that. And I got offered a bunch of stuff which I kind of just could not, in good conscience, kind of accept, because the material was like really not there and stuff like that. So I then got contacted by someone I knew who was putting together. They wanted to do, and this is the classic thing, they wanted to do literally a feature film, like a little horror feature film, and they had no money. And I basically sort of talked to them and said, listen, I want to do it. So if you're happy to have me, I'll do it. And so we're talking about a feature film, which we shot in 15 days. And it probably has a budget of in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's probably $500,000. if we're lucky. They haven't been honest. They haven't told me exactly, but it's between $350,000 and $500,000.
What's it called?
And it's called States of Mind.
Uh-huh.
And it was, and I basically said, I want to do this. I'm sick of kind of like, sort of sitting on the big $200 million films or, $50 million films and kind of going, this is stupid. Why are we doing this? And why are we doing that? And it's, and so I said, okay, I'm going to do this as a test bed. And I've actually used it as a bit of a test bed with a friend of mine who's a producer. And it's like, we all hear the stories of like, what is it? Casablanca was shot in like 20 days or something like that. Yeah, and, back in the day, they were making films in, a couple of weeks, Yeah. And yes, they weren't incredibly intense, difficult films, but
William Castle used to make movies in, what was it, 7 days for like 50 cents?
Yeah. And they did the Spanish version at night. So it's like, I want to prove this concept that, you can actually do a film and have a successful product and with this sort of process. So I had 2 electrics and 2 grips. I had 4 camera people because we managed to get 2 cameras. The total crew was about 20, 25 people. And it's a proper film. It's got actors and it's all set it's got different locations, and the main location is this big old house and stuff like that. We had night shoots and stuff like that we did day for night a lot because it kind of just made sense. And it's now in the editing process. So we do a few days of pickups. And
who was the writer director?
The guy called Shay Brown, who is a good friend of Matthew Riley, who's the author. I don't know if you know Matthew. I shot a film for Matthew 2 years ago, and it's he just wanted to make a film. He's done a couple of more. The Shay's done a couple of these films, and I said, okay, listen, I want to come on, but basically what I want to do is basically do this. We can, with efficiencies that I've learned from bigger films, with all the things that I'd like to try and things like this, and I want to kind of try this on your movie. And it's not about just getting people to work for free. In fact, everyone in this film, apart from me, because I'm on the line of a producer credit on this film, and I'll get paid out if the film gets sold.
Sure.
Everyone got paid, and we did 10-hour days, didn't do any overtime. And how can we do this? And it's like the grip and lighting truck was about the size of the coffee trucks that normally turn up on the big sets. Yeah. And the camera guys worked out of the station wagon, and we did it. And we were lucky, and we had some good makeup artists because we had creature makeups and things like that we had to do, and we had a couple of girls from Melbourne who signed on to the film for the same reason. They were younger and they wanted to try some stuff, and they were doing like creature turnarounds in like 45 minutes, and whereas normally it's like 4 hours and things like that. And it looked great, but the reason that worked is like, okay, it's just communication. It's like,
we'll have to mention this to Todd Masters, Gil.
Yeah. Listen, to me, it's not about kind of making everything cheaper. It's just basically making, because I think the resources that you have and that you bring to a production over the years have just kind of got bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's like, there's now sort of more people looking after the people who make the film than there are people making the film, and all this sort of stuff. So
did the fellow who directed it, did he write it?
He did, yes. Yeah.
It's really interesting, because I'm just comparing where I am right now on a couple of things. You made these huge movies, as I've made these huge movies. And recently I gave us a talk on Clubhouse, which is this app, where the people from all over the world, they tune in and they want to hear what you have to say. And I basically said, what do you want to hear from me? And ask questions. And, most people are just want to hear themselves talk and they have nothing really to ask. But I noticed was one guy kept asking me some really interesting questions. Finished the speech, finished the talk and the dialogue, and we hung up and thought about him for a couple of days. And then I found out how to track him down, and I sent him a note saying I'd like to talk to him further. Turns out he had written a script. He had made a 10-minute movie, not of that script, but of something else. And I said, can I see both? And he sends me the 10-minute movie. In 10 minutes, he created suspense, he created fright, he scares, character relationship. I mean, it was like unbelievable. And as I'm looking at it for the third time, I'm thinking, I can't think of a shot that he missed that I would have put in. So I read the script and I have a conversation with him. He lives in Abu Dhabi, Muslim guy, never made, he's made a little shorts, but he's never made a movie. Make a long story short, about a few months ago, we basically said, we want to make this movie with you.
Great.
And we're in the process of trying to do that. And, we're looking for some financing and all that, but I find that it's interesting that I'm sort of drawn to that as you were drawn to doing that, maybe because of the discovery of a new talent, maybe discovery of doing something that, you haven't done in a long time. And we all started out making little movies, and now going back to it is such sort of exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's like, I mean, I've always had the opinion that, I mean, you don't have to kind of go to like, the Roger Corman world of where it's kind of so cheap, it's its own genre.
Right.
You can still make, I mean, I would, I've seen all the dailies on this film, and I would sort of basically say that when this comes out, people would, and you ask someone what the budget was, I think they could probably say 15, 20 million. And because I think we've been that efficient in terms of making, just in terms of the assets you bring to it and how you use them. Yeah. And so it was I really wanted to do it because, again, it's like, it's sort of pointless when you're kind of standing there on very big budget films, and we're all aware of the budgets in those films, of how massive they are and how much of a responsibility and how much pressure that comes along.
It's amazing how lack of money will force you to innovate.
Yes, exactly. And it's like, and it's also just, just those different ways. And I used to go back to these things of like, in these great films that we all watch, they were all made in, weeks, not months.
Yeah.
So it's it's like, and there's no reason why you can't kind of, it'll even have a gravity back towards that a little bit. Some people are doing it, so it's there's no doubt about that. And sort of certainly there's other things, but to me it's like there's a world where you can make films for $2 or $3 million and they'll be just as good as anything that anyone's making for $25 million under the present kind of processes. So.
Well, most of these new horror movies, take Annabelle, for example. A friend of ours made Annabelle. It was a $5 million budget, made over 200 million. They did Annabelle 2, and now they're doing Annabelle 3. Yeah. And, that was, I mean, that's not 3 or 2, but it's 5 million. But it's still within a respectable amount of money for those kinds of movies.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that you work at that level and sort of like, everyone's getting paid when it makes $7 million rather than like, the last Avatar, which had to make $1 billion before it started making money. So it's like, that has a space, and I know, and all that sort of stuff. And,
sure.
But it's like, it's kind of, it feels like a different universe to me.
It's a kind of madness in a way. It's,
it is. It is. And especially when I have two sort of teenage kind of people in my house, and it's like, you kind of sort of see what they're attracted to and what they're turned off by and things like that. And they're not impressed by big budgets. They're really impressed by sort of interesting innovation stuff. So it's
I absolutely agree. I've got a 23-year-old, a 24-year-old who thought Avatar was kind of dull. Was like, hey man, you hit me over the head with the same point again and again and again. I got it.
Yeah.
And it's, you've spent a lot of money, and I'm not sure you got, the bang for the buck was delivered.
Yeah, exactly.
Ross, this has been a phenomenal conversation. What a pleasure to meet you.
Likewise.
We've been talking for over an hour, and if this wasn't a podcast, we'd probably talk for another hour.
Listen, love to. It's like it's very entertaining. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Let's call this part 1, and we will get to part 2.
Well, we still got to tell you some Dr. Moreau stories. Yeah.
Oh my God! Yes. Really and truly, as we really truly, Gil, we should dedicate ourselves every now and then to doing an episode about movies that how not to make a movie, and the island of Dr. Moreau is notorious.
Well, we can exchange more stories about John Frankenheimer. We have a couple of
gosh. So yes, we have but scratched the surface, and yet we told so much.
If you do make a trip to LA, I'm up in Vancouver. You got to let me know, because maybe you'll come up on the way, one way or the other, or I'll come down, or maybe I'll be in LA. And second time we meet or talk, you'll have to bring a long black if you don't mind.
Okay, all right.
I miss the long black. I used to have a great long black in the morning. For those who don't know, there's a whole coffee culture in Australia. Flat white, long black. Yeah. They have the most delicious coffee in the world.
Yes.
There's one place I must get to is Australia.
Oh, yeah.
It's not as far as you think. Everyone's kind of, oh my God, it's a 14-hour flight, but it's like.
I look forward to going there on someone else's dime.
Yeah, there you go. Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in as always, and we will see you next time. The How Not to Make a Movie podcast is executive produced by me, Alan Katz, by Gil Adler, and by Jason Stein. Our artwork was done by the amazing Jody Webster, and Jason Jody, along with Mando, are all the hosts of the fun and informative Dads from the Crypt podcast. Follow them for what my old pal the Crypt Keeper would have called terrific crypt content.